All right, here's the second part of building our grip controls for our hand. So let's go ahead and get started. We have everything set up. We have these different pins here to help us control and move our thumb, our fingers underneath them. And that's fine and dandy, right? But if we're an animator, it might be handy to have a control that just causes the hand to, form a fist. Or if we could go ahead and control these and build a curl in on them, so we can just drag a slider and the hand will automatically take some shapes that'll make it easier for us. So, as I mentioned in our first video, we'll use the set driven key option to basically build some custom poses, and we'll create an attribute on our hand CTL to go between those. So the first thing that I want to do to get this started is I will add an attribute to my hand, but right now I have, everything here visible that I don't want. So let's go ahead and hide these attributes, and I'll go ahead and see what happens if we lock and hide them. That may break the rig, but let's take a look-see. So I'll go ahead and select everything. I don't need to control any of these translates, rotates, or scales. So I'll go ahead and lock and hide selected. And let's see if this still works. Looks like it does. Great. Now I can't, move the hand, bone independent of the wrist, which is what I actually want in this instance. The reason that we built this hand bone was just to, hold this control for us earlier. If I switch back to FK, it looks like everything is still working as well. Cool. So I'll switch back to IK, and let's go ahead and build a ton of attributes for our curls. We will do things a little bit differently, so kind of like with our IKFK switch, we do need to have some minimum and maximum values in mind. But with this hand CTL, the actual control selected, right, we'll go over to the attribute editor, go up to attributes, and to add attributes. So what I want to do is I want to add a thumb, index, middle ring, and pinky finger curl. And I need the minimum and maximums to be -2 for our minimum and 10 for our maximum. And it'll make sense why we're doing that here in just a moment, but just go ahead and follow along and bear with me. All right, so let's go ahead and create those attributes. Let's make a long name. Let's start with an index curl. So go ahead and make this LT underscore index underscore finger curl. Override it with a nice name. That's just index curl. Our data type does need to still be float. Our attribute type does still need to remain scalar, but I will make my minimum -2 and my maximum +10. And actually, I'll go ahead and copy this long name field. So I'll grab it and hit Control-C because I'm going to add a bunch of attributes here with a very similar style. With that all set up, I'll go ahead and hit Add. And if we click on our hand CTL, right, and go back to our channel box, we do have an index curl now, which can go from -2 to +10. I'll leave that on 0 for now. And let's repeat that process for our other fingers. It looks like it didn't copy it. Dang. That's okay. So I'll just make this, LT middle underscore finger curl. I'll see if I can copy that with Control-C for sure this time. Make this middle curl as the nice name. Or minimum -2 or maximum +10. I hit Add. So now I have middle curl here. Let's keep trucking. Instead of a middle finger, we'll make this next curl for our ring finger. Override with a nice name, just make this ring curl. Minimum of -2, maximum of 10. Everything else we can keep the same. Go ahead and hit Add. Let's make one for the pinky, and then the thumb to bring up the rear. Add, and lastly, let's add the thumb. Oops. Thumb curl. Minimum -2, maximum +10. I'll go ahead and hit OK since that's the last one. So now in our hand CTL, we have access to a bunch of different curl values, right, that currently do absolutely nothing. That's okay. Go ahead and zero these out. But let's go ahead and get this lined up with a set-driven key. So I'll go ahead and open up the menu and we can sort of unpack what's going on here. But again, do pay special attention. I'm going to be doing things that are a little bit tricky, so you need to make sure that you uh, build our driven keys on the right attributes. But let's first open up our set driven key menu. So I will change my menu set from rigging to animation this one time, right? This is kind of a hack, right? Sort of, but I don't know why key. It's called a set driven key rather. It's probably why it's under our animation menu under key. But let's go again with our menu set. Change the animation. We'll go up to key, and we're looking for set driven key, and we'll go over to set. And now we'll get this menu opened up for us. I'll go ahead and change my menu set back to rigging for now. And I'll actually go ahead and save before I crash just to, save some time. So the way this works is that you can load a driver and a driven. You can load an attribute to drive another. And I might even go ahead and make 2 cubes just to make an example here. So here are my 2 cubes. I'll have p cube 2 be our driven, and I'll have my p cube 1 be a driver. So I'll go ahead and with my p cube 1 selected, I'll load driver, grab my p cube 2 and load driven. And a lot like our connection editor, right? We're able to have certain attributes control another, but we'll sort of use like a keyframe setup to specify the ranges that this is operating in. So let's say my p cube 1, I want it to translate x to control the translate y of my p cube 2. So right now I have this basically set in its base position, its base pose, right? I'll go ahead and click key. And do notice that on my p cube 2, my y now has a, cerulean like Azure box by it, so it's being controlled by something. But I'll go ahead and change my translate x on my p cube 1 to go further back this way. And I'll change my translate y to go, let's say, down. And I'll hit key again. So basically the way it works is that Maya will interpolate between those two. Oops, I need to, let's see here. Set key. There we go. Now it's going between the two. Now I will say what's going on here is technically my fault because I have this set up for animation class. So I'm going to go change something under the hood really, really quickly. And I'll take a look here and go into the graph editor. And I can sort of explain what's going on here. Yep, there we go. So the way the set driven key works is that it sets keyframes, off at sort of a weird time for us. And based off of the interpolation that we have, Maya will apply that interpolation to how we change our attributes. So we'll change that back to linear. So now if I move this back and forth, I have a linear correlation, basically, that's driving this range. And I can add more to this, right? So if I want to go, back this way, I can adjust this and set a key again. So now I can sort of build a slider that goes back and forth. Point being is that we can use this for our finger curls. And something that I will go ahead and have us set up is that we'll change our default tangent type to be linear so we can get a linear sort of interpolation. So I'll go to my Running Man cog real quick, and under the animation settings, our tangents, we want those to be set to linear. And weighted tangents is fine, but this is one instance where, in spite of what you're doing in your animation classes, we do want this tangent to be linear for our rigging purposes. So I'll save that out, and let's apply this to our fingers. So we're going to load these curls as our driver, and we're going to curl these manually to hold a pose to be our driven, and then we'll use that curl attribute to drive how that works. So I'll select my hand control, and again, go back to my animation menu set, go to key, set driven key, and set. With my hand CTL selected, let's go ahead and click on load driver. I'll go ahead and start with my index curl, so with load driver selected, or my hand CTL and my driver I'll go ahead and click on my index curl because that's what we want to drive it. And now we're going to bring in the groups, not the control curves themselves for our index finger, but the GRPs. So I'll hit Shift and click on my little menu down here so I can grab each one of my groups. I'll select my index 1 control group, hold down Control on my keyboard, right? Grab the next index 2 control group, and then the index 3 control group after that. So with all three of those selected, I'll go ahead and click on Load Driven. So now those are all in there. I can select all of them by grabbing my LT index 1, holding down Shift and grabbing down to LT index 3, so I can operate on all three of these at once. And lastly, I want to have our index curl affect the rotates. So again, I'll hold down Shift and grab my Rotate X. Actually, I'll single click Rotate X, then hold down Shift and grab Rotate Z so I can grab everything in between them. So now that I have everything set up, right now my index curl is set to 0. So I want that to remain as is. I'll go ahead and set a keyframe by clicking Key. So we can see over here for my groups, they have that blue box, so they're being controlled by something. Now let's go ahead and grab our rotate tool. Since our pivots are good and they're aligned up to the joint orientation, and I have all three of them selected, I can just rotate this and the finger will curl in on itself. But before we do this, right, I want to adjust my index curl value to 10 to, represent fully curled. So now if I go back to my hand CTL and change this to 10, this finger should pop back. So we want to set the driver, we want to change that value first before we modify our driven. So let's go ahead and grab those rotates again. The good thing is that we can use our set driven key to actually do so. So if I go ahead and click this off here, and just grab my index 3. I can click to my index 1, hold down Shift, and grab my index 3 again, and it'll actually grab those for the outliner for us. And now that I have my index curl set to 10, I'll go ahead and use my rotate tool to curl in my finger on itself. And again, notice that I'm doing these transforms on the actual groups, not the CTLs. And we do this for a reason, and it'll make sense once we set up our driven key a little bit further. But now that I have these curled into the position that I want, basically we'll create a pose for it to slide between. And I think that this is fine. But if you want to spend more time rotating these groups on their own, not the CTLs, but the actual groups, if you want to spend more time getting that posed out how you'd like, feel free to do so. But this is fine for now. Once I have this curl in the way that I like it, I'll go ahead and click Key. I have result 1. So now let's grab our hand CTL and take a look at what happens if we adjust our index curl. So I grab this and move it down. Now it's going to go ahead and curl between 0 and 10. 0 being, no curl at all, and 10 being completely curled. And, if you want to go back and adjust this, you absolutely can. So I can bring this curl value up to 10 again. And let's just say that, I want to adjust the rotations on those groups individually. I can select them to the outliner. Maybe make this a more realistic pose for a curl. Maybe bring this a little bit in further. And uncurl this ever so slightly. Once I've made those changes, I can hit Key again. And again, my index curl is set to 10, right? So it's going to change what the pose looks like when I set this value to 10. And I can, again, bring this down to 0. And now I have the new pose. So you can adjust this if you want to go back and change it. But let's go ahead and work on straightening this out a little bit. Because right now we have it to 0, right? But we also have a -2 setting. So we can not only curl our fingers, but let's build in a pose to straighten it. So I'll go ahead and set my index curl to -2 first before I change these poses, right? I'll use my set driven key menu to select all of those groups. And I'll rotate this back out so my finger is straightened out a little bit. And that's actually a pretty good straightened out pose. So I'll go ahead and hit Key to store that pose. So now we can go all the way from 10 to -2. with 0 being our resting pose, but we can even take it down further to -2 to get a straightened out finger. I might actually adjust my index 3 a little bit. Again, I'm grabbing the group, right? The stuff that has those blues on the keyframes. Because that finger bend was looking a little weird. And I'll hit key again. And now it's looking better. So a little confusing, right? And I'll go over this process again with the middle finger, just so we can get the hang of it. But the idea is that we're using those custom attributes that we set to basically interpolate between the poses. And that's the basis of a set-driven key. And the last thing that I do want to point out is the reason that we did those on the groups, not the CTLs, is because those groups have the blue boxes, right? They have those outgoing connections, but our CTLs are still, perfect and zeroed out. Point being is that I can, curl my index, but then as an animator, I can go in, grab the actual CTLs, and, animate on top of those. So we basically can sort of stack the two different transformations that we're doing. Let's go ahead and zero that back out to get it pointed right. And let's go ahead and repeat that process for the middle finger. Again, I'm going to be using the groups to hold those transforms so our animators can operate on the CTLs on their own. So I'll go ahead and bring back my set-driven key menu. What I'll do instead now is I'll click on my middle curl, since that is the new driver. But I do need to reload this driven menu, so I'll go ahead and find my middle one GRPs. Get my middle one, hold down Control, and grab my second GRP and my third GRP. And I'll go ahead and load driven again. So now we have our middles in here instead. I'll grab my first middle, hold down Shift and grab to the third middle, and grab my rotate X, hold down Shift and grab to rotate Z. So again, like in animation, I want to set a keyframe on 0. So my middle curl currently is set to 0. So I'll go ahead and hit key. And let's go ahead and build that curl for our 10 again. And again, I can use this menu over here to grab those control curves, or those control groups rather, back, as opposed to selecting them through the outliner. And let's go ahead and make sure that our middle curl is set to 10. Now we can make that pose change and have it hold that for us. So I'll change my rotate tool with those groups selected, right? And the blue boxes there, they're not the actual CTLs. Go ahead and curl this in on itself. And again, taking a look at my own hand and posing it, that first knuckle doesn't bend that far as a general rule. So I might come in here, grab the groups again, and make those adjustments manually. And go ahead and hit key once I have the pose that I like. Test it again by going between 0 and 10. So it looks like that's doing what it needs. And lastly, let's straighten it out. So we'll first change this to -2 before we set our next key. I'll use this menu again to grab my middle finger groups. I'll just straighten the middle finger out a little bit. Made my third group, doesn't need to come out that far. And once I've made those changes to the new pose that I want to hold, right, I'll hit key. And test this out again. So back down to 0. I'm in my resting place. If I go down to -2, I'm straightened out. Drag this up to 10, I can curl. All right. And I can even do both of these at the same time, right? Like I keyed in 10 as a value for both of them, the maximum value, and it curled both of them for me. And I can zero them out and do the same. All right, so that is how you set up a curl control. I'll go ahead and once again speed through building those controls for the middle finger and the pinky, or the ring finger rather, and the pinky finger. I will do the thumb a little bit differently, so I might slow back down there, but I'll go ahead and speed through now and see you on the other side, repeating that same process for the ring and the pinky. All right, so hopping back in here, I'm looking at the drivens for the thumb. I am just gonna be a little more careful about how I rotate this. That's the only difference that I want to make. I have my rotate selected. I'll set key for my pose on 0. And depending on how I want to do this, I might just grab these thumbs individually and curl them in that way. So I think that's fine. I just wanted to say that I'm doing those, differently, one at a time, because the orientation on my thumb is just a little bit weird. Let's see here. I didn't put my thumb curl up to 10, so if I move this, it's actually going to pop back. So that might be an issue that you come up against as well, is that before you make that change, right, before you create the new pose, make sure you adjust your curl value to 10, or, the maximum that you want it to be. So I'll go ahead and do that again. See here. What does it look like when my thumb curls in? As always, use yourself as reference, right? I might need to come in a little bit this way. And we can get pretty specific with these poses, right? That's a good thing about the driven key. And by doing them on the groups, we can have the groups hold that junk data for us, our offset for us. I'll go ahead and hit key there and be as specific as we need. So now if I drop this back down to 10, yep. So let's go ahead and do -2. That's, sort of the L shape that our thumb holds, when we extend it out. So I might adjust it this way a little bit. Looks good. I'll hit key again. So it looks like we have some pretty good back and forth motion here. All right. Ooh, and actually, if we take a moment to unselect here, it may looks like I have a little bit of an issue where my thumb is actually having influence on the weight of my joint here. So, this is an opportunity for me to come back in, paint weight style, and I can just clean up by going into the component menu. So yeah, there's thumb 3 influence here, which is what we don't need. That is a good point about skin weights, is that we can adjust our skin weights after the fact. Now it looks a lot better. Cool. So if you do catch something like that, it's okay, right? The order that you do the skin weights in, you can still go back and clean them up after the fact. So just be on the lookout for stuff like that. We'll go ahead and save as, and we'll go ahead and mirror this over and finish it up. Okay, so it looks like everything is working, right? Our curls are doing as they need to. But the way this is going to work, right, is that right now, if we were to apply our tactics that we've done before, is that if we, duplicate our hand, give it its own group, and scale across x by a factor of -1, everything's going to be fine, right? But if I go in here and mess with those curls, those are gone. So we're going to kind of have to undo a little bit of work, but it was very good to get this set up to make sure that our motion is correct. But by doing this, it'll make it a lot easier to mirror these over, because I think arguably setting up those driven keys and doing that layout takes the longest, right? And if you really wanted to, you could just redo the steps that we've done and rebuild the entire control by scratch. But I am lazy, and I want to find ways to cheat the system a little bit. So we will use what is called a duplicate special command, which allows us to basically duplicate some items but keep their connections. So right now, if I were to go up to edit down to duplicate special, I would get a whole new set of controls, right? Now I have a extra switch, I have a new root bone system that's just sort of hanging out, which is not what I want. So if we duplicate special, it's going to keep those connections for us, but that includes being connected to the skeleton. So what we actually need to go through and do is delete some of those constraints so we don't get a duplicated skeleton. Let's go ahead and pick some of those apart. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go to my LT hand group constraint and delete it. So now those won't follow the hand anymore. But I also do need to go in. I'll grab my actual hand bone and hit F with my cursor over the outliner. And I will hold down Shift and left click this to bring it open. And now we can see all those orient constraints that we set up. We're going to need to delete these as well. So I'll just grab them and use Shift to delete all of them. This will make sense. It looks like we're undoing the work that we did, but it'll make sense in just a moment. I'll go ahead and delete those all up. And I'm just using Shift Select to grab multiples at the same time and hit delete. So now our hand is not going to be working anymore, right? We can still have those curls, and it looks like our curls are moving the controls, which is still what we want, because that's the hardest part, right? The layout and the controls that we set up with the driven keys will take the longest to recreate, but creating those orient constraints will not be too tough. And again, our hand is now freed. It's not constrained. So let's go ahead and do that duplicate special thing again, but we'll look at some options. So with my LT hand group selected, I'll go up to the Edit menu, down to Duplicate Special, and over to the Options box. I'll go ahead and reset my settings to do that. All right. So the biggest thing that we're looking for here is that we want to turn on the Duplicate Input Graph option. That'll gray some stuff out for us. That's okay. And I do want to change the group under option from parent to world. So what duplicate input graph does, right, is that it basically preserves those connections that we created our driven keys. If we went into the node editor and we looked at the inputs there would be a lot of stuff wired up there. And it's basically keeping those and duplicating them. So if I now click duplicate special, I have my LT hand group 1, right? But if I go in, I might even use isolate select to prove a point here. If I go in here and grab my curls, I'm still getting those curls and all those poses that we created. So we don't have to try and mirror those over by hand. Go ahead and unisolate that. So like I've done with everything else, I'll go ahead and grab my group. I'll hit Control G to group it, right? And then I will change my scale on X from 1 to -1. And now this is all mirrored over to the other side. If we turn off the girls geometry, our little pins are pretty much exactly where they need to be. There are a couple of things that might have gotten off just a little bit, but for the large part, it's going to be a lot easier for us to align these to the bones. Let's see here. And let's take a moment here to swap between FKIK. So we might need to do a little bit of adjusting, right? Just a slight amount of cleanup. The mirror isn't 100% perfect. Let's even go in here and look. So that's going right in the middle of the bone, right? And if we go over here and hop in, that's not going correct, like 100% directly into the middle of the bone. But I'd much rather just quickly realign these with the V key. So our orientation should still be correct, and it looks like it is. Yep. Just go ahead and get those mirrored over. I will say the one thing that might be different is that I tried to fix my thumb socket. So it's a little bit better on this side versus how it is on the other side, but that's okay. So I'll go ahead and unparent my LT hand from this. Let's go ahead and rename everything first, and then we'll start aligning it and getting things back and matched up. Go ahead and hit Shift P on my LT hand group 1. I'll delete my previous group. Again, we're going to start seeing some negative values in our scale for those different controls, right? And again, that's okay. We just want those to be mirrored up to the other side. So I'll go ahead and select my hierarchy here and use comment rename to search for LT and replace with RT. And if you do get an error like this, you may just have to go through and open things up and select them all by hand. And that's okay, right? I again just want to try and save as much time as possible. So I'll just use Shift to select everything on the other side and then run search and replace. And now everything that was once named LT is now named RT. While we're here, let's go ahead and rename our attributes under the hood. So under our RT hand control, I'll select this, go over to the attribute editor, go up to attributes, edit attributes, And we can just change our attribute names from, we don't need to change our nice name, but we do need to give the new name um, an RT instead of an LT. So make that RT finger curl. I'm going to say no object matches name because we renamed it. That's okay. I'm just going to go through and rename everything else RT here. You still have those minimum and maximums of -2 and 10, right? So we just need to make a couple of tweaks under the hood just to make sure everything looks good if we were to, examine some of our attributes. Let's see here. And an attribute with the name already exists. Looks like I might have something else named RT index. Right, so this got misnamed. Let's go ahead and rename that to middle finger. Make sure everything else is named like it should be, and it is. Cool. And of course, double checking here. It looks like our little curls are still working, and that's the important part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these. I'm going to move the groups, right? I don't want to move the actual controls, right? Because if we try and move those and snap those to the bone, we're going to get junk. So I just want to move the actual index finger groups and my middle finger groups, the actual groups with V, and snap them to the joints. Go in here, grab my... And the last thing that I do want to note here is that I'm going to do this at the top of the hierarchy and work my way down. Hold down V and snap this in. And it looks like everything else is still a little bit out of alignment. So I want to start with my index 1 group, but I'll go to my index 2 group, hold down V, snap it in. Got my index 3 group, which now is a little bit out of alignment, snap it in. But it does look like my joint orientation is still lined up perfectly. Great. So I'll grab my middle 1 group, hold down V, snap it. Grab my middle 2 group, hold down V, snap it. My middle 3 group, hold down V, snap it. Same with the ring. Hold down V and snap it in. My ring 2, hold down V, snap it in. Ring 3, hold down V and snap it in. Pinky 1, hold down V, snap that in. And go ahead and work my way down. And then lastly, I'll go ahead and do my thumb, which is, way out of the way, but that's okay. I use V to snap it in. Use V to snap it in. So it looks like my orientation is looking good. And then it looks like, I'll take a look here. It looks like my hand bone is actually a little bit off as well. That should be fine, actually. Okay. And our curls are still working. So we'll just go through and do those orient constraints on the thumb joints again. Or not the thumb joints, but the actual finger joints. So I'll again just work through, grab my first pin, hold down shift and grab the bone beneath it, go up to constrain, down to orient. And I'll repeat this process again by grabbing the next curve, right? Not the actual group. I want to use the curves this time. Grab the bone, and I'll repeat my previous step with G and continue to do so, working my way down the rest of the hand. Again, the parent constrains the child, so we want the control curve to be selected first and grab the bone last. Then I'll hit G again to repeat that step. Keep working my way down. And did I do these already? Doesn't look like it, so I'll grab this, Shift and G, Shift select and hit G. So now if we bring our girls' geometry visibility back, our curls are doing everything that they need to do, just on the right side. All right. And I'll go ahead and constrain my bone, right? I'm going to grab the bone first, shift grab my hand control, constrain parent. Oops, what do you mean cannot add? Let's see here. Oh, it's going to be because I have everything locked here. So since this is locked and hidden, I do need to make sure that I grab the group and have that be what holds my constraint instead. So I'll grab my hand bone, then control click my right hand group. Now I can constrain parent. So now if I rotate this, it'll move with the hand. If I switch between FK and IK, there's a little pop. The hand will still move with. And my curls are all still working. Good stuff. So lastly, what I want to do is that I'll go ahead and reconstrain this hand because we duplicated special. We did delete those constraints, right? So right now if I try and grab this, nothing's going to move with it. So let's go ahead and get those constraints created again. So I'll grab my bone. I'll control click my hand group, right? Constrain and parent. So now if I move this, the hand will go with it. And let's add some orient constraints to the rest of the finger bones again. So I'll grab my thumb, hold down shift, grab the bone, go up to constrain, down to orient, grab my next control, hold down shift and grab the bone, constrain, down to orient. I'm going to start using that G key again by clicking on the pin, holding down shift, grabbing the joint, hit G as in go again, and repeat that process going down the rest of my fingers to get those constrained back up. Because again, going through right one last time and using constraints is going to be a lot quicker than using that constrain menu, right? And again, if you really wanted to rebuild controls on the right side without using duplicate special to mirror, you absolutely could. It just might take you a little bit longer. Go ahead and hit G, G, and G. So once again, if we take a look, our curls are working again. So we can curl, use transforms on top of our fingers, and now we have some hands set up. We can even shift select multiples, right? And adjust the curl on both sides. Zero that out. On the other side, zero it out. So that is how you get some different hand controls with a little custom grip built in. If you really wanted to, you could go in and add an actual grip attribute that controls all the fingers at once. You could use a driven key to control all the other curls here, or you could create another group in here, like an offset group like we have with our CTL groups to hold those transforms if you really want to get creative with it. But that is the basis of setting up some hand controls. So I hope this was useful. Go ahead and use this knowledge for your assignment of building this up on your boy and submitting it. And I hope this was useful. I'll talk to you next time.